All right, so this is Elaine Leeder. She is the Dean of Emerita of Social Sciences and a professor of sociology here at SSU. She has written 5 books, and she has taught 3 times on Semester at Sea, which took her to over 40 countries. She speaks in various settings about her family being killed in the Holocaust in Lithuania, and many of you have taken her introduction to Soch 201. Please welcome Elaine Leeder.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. How many of you took my 201, Soch 201 class with me? Put your hand up. Not that many. Oh, I'm surprised. I'm sorry. Some of you should. We have a good time in there, don't we? You know, it's usually, you learn a lot. So if you're looking for a social science class, I teach it in the fall, and I recommend it. As do others, I think. So let me say a little bit about myself and why they asked me to be here. When I was about your age, I became a leader. My last name is Leeder, L-E-E-D-E-R, but I sort of stepped into my leadership shoes. And as a result, in a lifetime, I've taken on increasingly responsible leadership positions. And it all started when I was in college. And so I'm going to tell you some stories about my work with helping people become leaders, but also to talk, my job today was to talk about community and the role that community plays in working in your leadership position. So I'm going to tell you a couple of stories because I like to tell stories. The first story is a historical one. It's about a child named Anna, who was an illegitimate child born out of wedlock, and this was, the 1800s, middle 1800s, and her mother and her grandmother were quite ashamed of her because she was illegitimate. I don't like that term, but in those days that's what they called it. And she was put in an attic, and she was kept there for her entire childhood. Eventually, someone had heard about her from a neighbor, and a public health nurse went to save her and tried to get her out of that situation. But she couldn't because there were no laws against a parent or anyone keeping a child captive. And the child became a feral animal, so to speak, meaning she couldn't speak, she couldn't walk, she was kept tied to a chair with a bucket under her, and she was fed minimally, and she had no community. They would come in, throw food at her, she could be heard wailing in the neighborhood. The public health nurse could not get her out of there, and finally went to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and said, this child is a human animal, a human being, Homo sapiens, and therefore she should be removed from this home, which she was, and put into a hospital and then eventually into some kind of treatment center. The child died before she was 10 because she had never been socialized. She had never been given an opportunity to interact with other human beings. So the point of my story to tell you about community is that without community, without a sense of belongingness, without being with others, either like ourselves or unlike ourselves, we are not able to survive. And the more isolated we are, the less likely we are to thrive. By the way, I want to apologize for these glasses. I had an eye treatment last week, and the bright lights really hurt my eyes. I'm not trying to be a movie star. I'm blind. So the other story I want to tell you is this. I have done a lot of things in my life. I'm 73 years old. I've been in academia for 40 years. And over the years, I've taught, and I've worked in prisons, and I've worked in all kinds of settings with people that others might not want to know about. I like working with the homeless, with victims of domestic violence, with people who are perpetrators of violence. I'm drawn to the dark side because my family were all killed in the Holocaust. The only one who survived was my father. And so I've, for a lifetime, felt like I needed to understand perpetrators and also to be a memorial candle to speak to large groups of people about bullying, about atrocities, about the need to embrace diversity and to embrace others. So in the course of my lifetime, I've worked in a lot of interesting settings: mental hospitals, prisons, private practice as a psychotherapist. Most recently, I've been working in prisons, and I want to tell you another story about a young man that I met in prison who has recently gotten out. He had been in for 30 years. And the reason he was in was because he had been a rapist and had been in for violent felony rape. I didn't know this when I worked with him, but when he first came to San Quentin, which is where I was running groups, he had a chip on his shoulder. He was an angry young man. He had come through the system. He was only in his, I think he was about 48 or 50. He might have gone in when he was 20 years old, 18 or 20 years old. And he had become very tough in prison. He was probably tough on the streets, but then he just became tougher and tougher. So he gets to San Quentin, where we have a lot of programs. And he came to a group that I ran called New Leaf on Life, and there was a guy who ran it with me. He was one of the prisoners, and he was really the leader of the group. I was like the support person. And he said, "I don't like that guy." The guy's name was Rafi. He said, and my friend Don, who was also in prison, said, "I don't like that guy, Elaine." I said, "Let's give him a chance." Well, he was arrogant. Rafi was arrogant. He knew everything in this group. If we brought up a topic, he could top it. If somebody looked at him askew, he would be belligerent. And Don kept saying to me, "Elaine, I don't want him here. I don't think he's a good fit." I kept saying, "Don, let's give him a chance." So one day, I'm supposed to go into prison, and they're on lockdown. They forgot to tell me they were on lockdown, so I walk in. And I'm thinking, where is everybody? You know, they just kind of let me in and forgot to tell me nobody could come to program. So I'm kind of walking around, and out comes Rafi, and he said, "We're on lockdown." And I said, "Well, I guess so, but can we have a group anyway?" He said, "Let me go find the guys." So he went looking for strays, because they were only on lockdown in North Block, which is where he was living, but he was out of the lockdown. He went and he found probably 10 of my 30 guys for my group. We go, and he brings them to the baseball field, which was the only place we could find to sit and talk and have our group. And he was a leader. Slowly he was emerging. Then Don died. And who should become the leader of the group but Rafi? And I'm thinking, oh God, this is going to be hell. Right? This guy is not going to make it. He's going to be argumentative and pushy, and he transformed. In this group, he became a leader. He was a member of a community where he was respected. I respected him because he got the guys there. I respected him because others, the guards, the correctional officers, seemed to respect him, and I thought, let me give him a chance. Well, 30 years later, I just got an email from him the other day that he's out. And he got out because he had transformed through the process of being in varying communities and varying groups. And he had seized every opportunity in that prison to transform himself. And now he's out in transitional housing. He's going to college to become a drug and alcohol counselor. You know, he already worked on an associate's degree while he was inside. He'd found religion and had become a leader in his religious community. And the point that I'm making, both with Anna and with Rafi, is that without community, you will wither and die. And with community, you can flourish, even in the most challenging of circumstances. So I want to talk about what is community and why it's so important. So what is a community? First of all, let me ask all of you. Hopefully you either read the chapter or you know what community is. What do you think community is? Anybody? Hands up. I'm an Oprah Winfrey with academic rigor. I expect you to talk to me. This is not I'm not just a performer. I'm an educator. So what's a community? I'll call on you if you don't answer. Oh, could I ask you, what is a community? I'm going to call them in the back, too. What do you think a community is? Yeah. This gentleman in the front. Hello, with my glasses on, you can't tell. Right there.
A group of people that interact together on a daily basis.
Right, a group of people who interact together. I'll stop about a daily basis. Because some communities you might never see. You might be on internet, right? But you interact, right? A group of people with whom you interact. Simple definition. Could you elaborate, anybody, on what else you might have in common, or what else might be part of the element of defining a community? How about you on the corner over there in the blues? You just turned around. Yes. What else would you say is in a community?
Maybe like having like-minded interests and stuff.
Similar interests. There you go. Simple. I mean, this is not physics, right? This is not rocket science, or as one of my students once said, this is not rocket surgery, right? This is not rocket surgery. That's a mixed metaphor, in case you wonder. Yes?
A group of people who have the same values.
Good. So you have the same values, you have common interests, you interact, maybe on a daily basis, maybe not, but there's something about you that makes you belong. You want to say more?
Maybe there could be leaders and followers.
Sometimes there are leaders and followers, sometimes there aren't. Sometimes you rotate leadership. Communities are very amorphous, right? I belong to, and I think about it now, think about the communities you belong to. You probably belong to the residential community. You might belong to a religious community. You might belong to a study group that has become a community. What other kinds of communities are you all participants in? You right there with the gray jacket and the white blonde woman right there. What kind of communities do you belong to?
Sporting communities.
Sporting communities? Who else? What other kinds of communities? I won't put. Come on. This is not rocket surgery. Yes? What? Greek life. That's a community. And in all of these communities, be they sports or Greek life or any class study groups, those are places where you come together in order to grow, right? You're trying to grow in some way, or to support each other. And without those levels of participation, you're out there all alone. And I know plenty of people who try not to belong to communities, and they have a harder go of it. There are plenty of people who choose not to join communities, and they're kind of outside of the mainstream. And so they can be friends, they can be work-related, they can be family. Right now, we have kind of social communities through social media. We have political communities. Any of you who demonstrated recently or sent postcards recently, those are all members of varying kinds of communities. And what's good about them? What's good about being in a community? Anybody want to risk a chance? Why is it good to be in a community? Thank you.
You all support each other.
You support each other, right? And without that, you're lonely, right? I mean, imagine studying for an exam. Sometimes you do it alone, but as you probably, I hope you all know by now, it's better to study in a group for a while because you learn from each other. Maybe they interpret it one way, you interpret it, and you discuss it. I'm a drum. I'm in an African drumming group, and I had not been for several weeks. And as soon as I got there, one person over here showed me one of the riffs, and another one showed me the other. By the end of the hour, I knew what I was doing. So I was not alone. They supported me in learning what was important in this drumming. What else?
Communities can help individuals develop.
Right. And in what way? Could you elaborate a bit? Do you mind? You said they could help you develop.
Gain confidence. confidence.
You gain confidence, right, because if you're a leader in a community, where often many of you are going to be, it's where you hone your skills, right? It's where you learn what you're good at. You know, I know that I'm good at public speaking and balancing a budget and that sort of stuff. I know that I don't know how to fix a car. So I'm not going to be in a car fixing community, right? But I might be in a community of like-minded leaders, right? What kind of community are you in, may I ask?
What was that? I'm a part of the rowing team.
The rowing team? Good, that's a tough community, right? You're out there at what, 4 in the morning or something?
I get up by 4:30.
4:30, yeah. I used to row. I caught crabs too often. I gave up on it. It was fun. I give you credit. What else is good about being in a community? Thank you.
They provide different thoughts.
Different thought, exactly, because, you know, we're all like narrow. I hate to say it. We're in a bubble. Each person lives in a bubble. It's like a fishbowl. You don't know you're in a fishbowl. And if you crack the fishbowl, you'll die because you're out of the water, right? But we're all in a fishbowl, our own little fishbowl. And fortunately, if you're in a community, other fish get into that bowl with you, and you can see how it functions. You learn more from others, and that's part of the joy of being in a community. What's also good is a sense of incorporating people who are similar to you, but also dissimilar from you. I mean, I remember once when I was running, I used to be a psychotherapist, and somebody once said to me, your group has to be, what was it, something like similar enough to have interests in common, dissimilar enough so that it's spicy and interesting. You don't want a whole bunch of people who think and be just the way you are. That's boring, right? And it makes you a very narrow person. The other day I had this remarkable experience. I got invited to a dinner. It was called Your Muslim Neighbor. And it was in Petaluma, and I went to this event where there were 500 people, probably about 300 non-Muslims, 200 who were. And you noticed I said Muslim, not Muslim. The guy, the imam there, told us the word is Muslim, not Muslim. And they gave us backgrounds on the tenets of Islam. And we asked a million questions, and I was sitting at the table with a group of women who were in hijab. And then we had a fabulous Indian meal, because most of the Muslims who were there were from India. So I felt like I was privileged to be in this setting, and I was amongst people who were so dissimilar from myself. I'm Jewish, so this is like really different. But I felt really embraced and learned a lot, and it was dissimilar, but I was with people I knew, so it was comfortable enough, but not totally comfortable. So that's what you need in a functional community. Don't replicate yourselves. I mean, don't reproduce yourselves. You really need to be different enough to get a little, someone said it, other ideas. Important to include that. The other thing that is good about communities is that you have to have good communication. And part of being in a group, as we were talking about, developing your leadership skills, is learning how to communicate. I run, right now I'm working with victim-offender dialogues, perpetrators of violent crimes and their victims. And in that setting, I have to help them communicate with each other. The perpetrator has to express remorse and a sense of taking responsibility for their crimes. The victim has to express what it is that what has happened to them as a result of this crime, but also to have some kind of empathy or understanding of this other person's condition. What led this perpetrator to do this horrific crime? This is called restorative justice, and it includes incredibly important communication between two parties who have opposite experiences related to the same horrible crime that took place. By the way, does anyone, I'm from New York, does anyone, and I talk really fast, would anyone like to ask me any questions so far? I've talked about Rafi, and I've talked about my prison work, and about groups, and do you have any questions you'd like to ask me? I'm hoping you're an inquisitive and intelligent audience. Nothing? Thank you. I like you.
I was curious, what got you into prison work, like of all the places you could have gone to?
It's a good question. As I said, my father was a Holocaust survivor, so I was always drawn to the dark side, you know, understanding why would somebody kill my family? What was it? Why? So eventually I started to work in domestic violence. And I worked first with victims, but then I started to work with perpetrators of violence. And then I was teaching in upstate New York, and a group of students said they wanted to go to a prison. So I said, oh, let's go. So I led a tour to Elmira Correctional Facility, and I said to the warden, do you have any educational opportunities in here? And he said, well, we have GED. I said, would you like some? Boy, that was a silly moment on my part, because it opened the door. That was 1995. I started to bring professors to the prison to give the guys 3 units of a credit for Introduction to Sociology. And from that, when I came to SSU, I moved here for a job, the job of Dean of Social Sciences, and I knew San Quentin was down the road, and I knew I needed to work in prisons because it is the most rewarding work I have ever done in my life. To watch the transformation from people who were gangbangers and murderers and rapists and, you know, tough dudes, I'm only working with men, to see them become human beings who have transformed themselves. And I feel privileged to be part of the process to help them. And I'm enormously privileged to help. I got a letter today from one of the guys that I'm working with on this victim offender stuff. And he, you know, I drive to the Central Valley. I drive 6 hours to see him, 6 hours home, and he appreciates it. Nobody comes to see him. And I'm helping him apologize to his victim and develop some kind of a sense of, what would I say, rapport, if you will, that she can ask all the questions she wanted to know. He'll answer them honestly and apologize, and so she can get on with her life, and he can get on with his. So I feel like it's work that gives me far more than I get out of it. Is he going to be the only one? Yes. I see more. Good.
Curious in regards to Rafi, well, you said you originally didn't know that he was a rapist when you first started working with him.
No.
Did it cause you to change the way you interacted with him when you did find out?
I just found out. He's going to come to my intro to social class in the fall, and he said, he wrote to me about what he was going to talk about, and he said, I was a serial rapist. And I thought, oh my God, what am I getting myself into? But you know, I brought murderers to my class. Why not a serial rapist, right? So did it change my way of thinking? It made me think twice. I thought, thank God he's little and I'm big. But you know, I also know he's transformed. I know he's not going to perpetrate again because he'll be in prison for the rest of his life and he doesn't want that. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4, good, 5. Yeah, 1.
How did you prepare yourself
For what?
for working in like the dark side? Like how did you prepare yourself? Because
How did I prepare myself? Well, I have to say, I grew up in darkness. The shades were drawn. My father was paranoid about the neighbors because the neighbors turned my family in. So I was already dark, if you will. Then I got a master's in social work. And initially, my heart bled for every person I worked with. Well, you can't keep doing that forever because you'll burn out. So I learned to become more self-contained. I didn't have to bleed for everybody who came in. I could empathize, I could feel their pain, I could help them, but I was not going to go there every time. Oh my God, this is killing me. So I went, as I always tell students, you go down and you come out the other side. You don't block it out. I lost myself to my first client. You know, he was a kid, and he was a foster kid, and, you know, and I wanted to take him home, and then he ripped me off, and then it was like, oh, I don't like this kid, and eventually I could realize I had to have some boundaries. So it's about learning about boundaries. Does that answer your question? Okay. 2.
Well, first of all, I have to say, you're just so awesome.
Oh. I needed that. I've been feeling crappy about myself. Thank you.
No, and then the second thing is, do you ever consider yourself a leader, and what is your definition of a leader?
I do consider myself a leader. I think I used to be embarrassed to be a leader. I remember the first time somebody offered me a supervisory position, and I thought, I can't do that. I don't know. Pardon me. I don't know shit. Pardon my language. Have you ever heard the phrase, fake it till you make it? That's what I did. I faked it till I made it. And then nobody knew, because if I was screwing up, you know, I'd cover my tracks quick. When I took the job as dean here, I didn't know anything about budgets. I had an $8 million budget. I had this fabulous budget manager who sat me down and said, this is how you read it, and, you know, and I had personal skills with people, so I could do that part of the job, and I learned the other part. And I screwed up royally. I mean, the previous president, Arminiana, called me to his office and said, you screwed up badly. But, you know, he didn't fire me, and I just kept going. And yeah, I see myself as a leader now. I've sort of grown into it. I don't think you know it at first. And those who think they do are too arrogant. And they ought to get knocked around a little bit to realize that we all make mistakes, and you got to screw up. And then you can be a good leader because you're humble. So you need to be humble as a leader because you don't know all the answers. If you're smart, or what did somebody once tell me? I love this tip. Hire somebody who is the best person for the job, who's smarter than you, and leave them alone. And that was great advice. You had your hand up.
I wanted to ask you, like you said, you work with victim offenders. Like, is there like always resolution, or is it sometimes like?
It's a good question. She's asking me, are there always resolutions through victim and offenders? No. Recently, I've been working with a young man who planned to do the whole process. He was insightful and really articulate, together, ready to go, and then he pulled out from the event, from having the event a week before, because he'd been given some advice by a family member not to do it, and his family member scared him. And so he stopped the process. The victim, who was the mother of the victim who was killed, is still hoping that it will happen someday, but it hasn't happened. So no, they don't always come to fruition, nor do they always come to fruition favorably, right? But often they do. I mean, sometimes people end up, I remember seeing a movie, which is what got me into this kind of work, about a woman who went in to see her daughter's murderer. And the daughter of the victim, who had now grown up, so about a 20-year-old young woman and a 60-year-old mother, going to see the murderer. The mother wanted to know, what did my daughter say on her deathbed? The daughter wanted to know, did my mother mention me on her deathbed? Which wasn't deathbed, it was out in the field or something. And the perpetrator, the murderer, said, your daughter said, I forgive you and God does too. That made the mother feel better. The daughter heard that the that the mother had said, please let me live, I have a child to raise, I love her. That made the daughter feel better, that she was on her mother's lips when she died. Bless you. And the guy felt better because he was telling the truth for the first time. He'd been incarcerated for over 20 years. They really became very close, and the mother helped him when he got out to get a job and get a place to live. That's the beauty of restorative justice, because in prison or in the criminal justice system or in courts, it's all adversarial. You know, you have to lock them up and throw away the key. Well, what are you going to do when they get out? Right? You got to have a human being who gets out, and prisons don't teach you that. Programs teach you that. So these kinds of programs, I'm about to work in another program, I'm hoping, to help men in prison write letters to their victims of apology, which would then be provided to them. And then should they decide, because it has to be initiated by the victim, then they will ask for a mediation, the kind that we're running. So in answer to your question, that's how it goes. Somebody over here had their hand up. Yeah. A little louder because you're in the way back.
What drew you to sociology, and what is your own definition of sociology?
Should I give you the flippant answer or the scholarly answer, or both? Okay. My flippant answer is, you'll pardon the language, I like nuts, sluts, and perverts. That was the name of an article that a sociologist once wrote, Sociology, the study of nuts, sluts, and perverts. I realize that's labeling, and that's not nice, right? To call someone a pervert or a nut or a slut, right? It's not nice, but it's funny. So I do it just for the humor of it. Sociology is the study of society, and it can be any level of society. It could be two people, it could be a large community, it could be global. There is now a global sociology. I write some global sociology now. So it's not anthropology, which is really about the study of the cultures of various societies, but this is more about the institutions, the structures, the way that people interact with each other, not about what they wear or their language, although that's part of it. And there's so many ways of studying it. What drew me to sociology, the other thing that drew me to sociology besides my family background, it's a bit of my family background, I had a schizophrenic uncle. And he really influenced the whole family when I was growing up. And so I was sort of geared to take over for my grandmother and then my mother to help Uncle Morty. So I could either be a psychologist or a sociologist. And I didn't like, psychology to me is much more of motivation and perception and, development. I really wanted to ask more interactive questions. What is it like in the community? Community again. What does community do to people or not do to people? Why is it, I always ask myself this when I meet prisoners, why is it that one prisoner committed a murder and the other one's brother is a priest? Same family. Why? Those are the things sociologists would answer. I still haven't got that answer. More questions, please.
Was there ever a point while doing prison work where it became too much that you felt like you didn't want to do it anymore?
Oh, let me have a drink and I'll tell you. It's not alcohol, it's electrolytes. The question down here was, did I ever think it was too much and didn't want to do it anymore? Yes, often. And I would change fields. The joy about being a sociologist is there are many communities to study. So when I was young, I worked with youth. I got tired of youth. I was getting older. Then I worked with couples because I was in a marriage, so I wanted to know how couples worked. Then I got burned out of that. My marriage ended. I didn't want to work with couples anymore. I was tired of it. Then, what did I go to after that? Oh, gerontology. I was getting older, right? So let me study old people. Then I went into prisons and been swept away now for 20 years. And I did burn out of running my groups because I had been doing those for like 15 years. And now I'm doing these victim offender dialogues. That'll probably take another 10 years, and by then I'll be dead. So, when you get old, you face it. And so, no, I move from thing to thing to thing as I get tired of the thing that I've done. But it may, when you've been around in your field for 40 years, you can have done a lot of things, so, and if you do even of them for 10 years, that's 4 different things, but you add other things in between, you could have quite a varied career.
I was curious, do you ever feel that there can be too many leaders inside of a group?
Absolutely. Too many leaders spoil the broth. Absolutely. It's sort of like, that's a mixed metaphor. But I think rotating leadership works the best. But when people start to vie for leadership positions, it was kind of like Rafi and Don. Don was in charge, but Rafi wanted to be in charge. Well, Don finally died, so Rafi took over. But it was a competition of egos. And I think the sign of a good leader is to learn to sit back and watch and let things evolve. And if somebody's ego is so, that's my attitude when I go into a group. If there's somebody who wants to lead, you do it. My time will come. And not to vie for leadership positions or rotate them. I'll run the group this week, you run the group next week, or you take it for 6 months and I'll take it for 6 months. That way it works a lot better than fighting it out. Good question. What's your first name?
Alex.
Hi, Alex. It's good to meet you. Yes.
So I'm going to read you a quote, and I want you to tell me if you agree or disagree.
Sure.
To be effective, a leader must have similar characteristics to the people they are leading.
To be effective, a leader must have similar characteristics to the
people they are leading.
To the people they are leading. God, is it time already? Please stay until 12:50 unless you have a class. I only partially agree with that. I think you need to be similar enough that you have something in common, but dissimilar enough so that you don't just replicate or agree with them completely and have no edge, no difference. Because you really need to be, I remember when I first started in a mental health clinic, I ran a group for depressed women. Well, to be honest with you, I was a depressed woman too, but I couldn't show it, right? I had to be professional. And I thought it was a very ineffective group for a while because everybody was depressed, including the leader. And it was like they were feeding off each other. Then another woman came in. She was manic. Perfect, right? Because her energy kind of lifted the rest of them, but their energy kind of brought her to a moderation. And so it was far more, I think I was not as effective because I was as depressed as they were. So I think, sometimes you need diversity in a group. And I don't just mean race. I mean age, intellect, values. All kinds of differences make for a more interesting community. And then you learn, as somebody said before, you really learn from those people in a way that you wouldn't if you were all the same. So, good question. How about others? Come on, ask me questions. It's much more fun. How about the back? Do you all sit back there because you don't want to get engaged? Then I'm going to ask you to please participate. Somebody in the back, ask me a question. One person. I see a hand. Thank you.
So you said that she went into prisons and with perpetrators to find out the reasoning why people commit crimes. What did you learn from that?
Would you repeat the question?
So when you said at the beginning that you wanted to investigate why people committed crimes, what did you learn?
Okay, that's a great question. Why do people commit crimes? I don't know that this has to do with community and leadership, but okay, I'm happy to answer it. Thank you. I learned that people commit crimes, well, for the most part, they've been abused as children. Almost everyone that I know who've committed crimes were either beaten as children or sexually assaulted as children. Many of them also want to be members of communities. So one guy I know, Noe, who is out, I went to his wedding, he has now kids, he's really got his act together. He used to come to my class and said, he was a gangbanger, and he wanted to show the guys in the gang what a macho guy he was so that he could be included and embraced by the group. His parents had been migrant laborers. They were never at home. They were good parents, but they weren't there. And so he wanted to belong, and that's why he did it. So mostly it's about having been abused or also the need for belongingness, unfortunately. And if we stopped that kind of abuse by intervention and community involvement, we could probably diminish the amount of crime that we experience in this country. Unfortunately, we are not doing so. Is that a hand? Yes.
What type of legacy do you want to leave within your own community?
Could you repeat her question? Somebody repeat what she just said.
What type of legacy do you want to leave in your own community?
Oh, my goodness. One, I would love to be remembered. That would make me happy. But two, I would like to have brought about some change. The legacy would have to be something about, I've been working on issues of gender and race and violence my entire life. At the age of 5, my mother told me I couldn't walk to school with a young black girl who'd come from me. And I remember I didn't understand why. And ever since then, I went to the corner and met her so I could walk to school with her. So I was not following the rules my mother set out even when I was little. And so my job, I believe, in life is to help people know, like you all, that you can change society. In fact, if that's a way to end, you all have the tools to be agents of social change, every one of you. And if there's a legacy I want to leave, it's to empower each one of you to use that to change society. We are in horrible times, worse than I can ever remember. And it's your job and your responsibility, because you're younger, to make those changes that you want to see and not sit back, but go and demonstrate or write letters or go into leadership positions and empower others, because what's that line? Be the change you want to see. You can do it because you're in a leadership position to do so. So that was a great question. I guess that's my attempt at legacy. And I think our time is up.